Hi there, it's Karen. Like I need to say that anymore now at the beginning of every single video I do. This is Whiskey Sour. I do need to say that though because you guys should know him. Incoming celebrity right there. If he ever comes out of his shell and talks to us. I don't know if that'll happen in this video, but see how it goes. I wrote a blog today called Do You Consider Yourself the Black Sheep? This is something I've considered myself and my family for a really long time. I'm a little different. I do things a little differently. And I was writing about an artist named James O'Barr. Some of you guys might know who that is. And he's really, when you watch an interview with him, and I think there's a 4-part series of it up on YouTube, when you watch the interview with James O'Barr, definitely would say that guy's a black sheep. Just could not find his way for a really long time. And I watched the interview, and I wanted to kind of condense it. What I just jotted down as I was watching the interview, I just jotted down some of the points that I wanted to share with you guys because I found it really inspiring. For those of us who really feel like we are the black sheep, I think it's good to know, again, that we're not alone, but that we can have an outlet for that, and that there's actually a reason and there's channels that you can kind of put that into. So I really love this interview with James O'Barr. Highly recommend you watching it if you can get a chance. It's just really long, so that's why I want to condense it kind of into a blog today. He did his own pictures on the backs of coloring books, and he never goes anywhere without a sketchbook. He probably has about 100 sketchbooks and about 15 years worth of material. He doesn't translate his scripts, he does the writing and the creating, and he has to have a personal attachment for him to be involved because he says it takes too much out of him. There's a quote from him there where he says, "None of it is just eye candy, everything has a meaning. Because it's so draining and takes so much out of me, something has to be worthwhile for me to invest that much emotion into it." He saw it as therapy, working out his anger, and he said it was cheaper than seeing a therapist. He lived in a trailer and his birth mother was drunk all the time. They had to give him a birthday because she actually didn't know when he was born. They said on the interview that it was like somewhere in December and January, so they just said, oh, let's call it January 1st. So that's how they had to give him a birthday. He lived in an orphanage and foster care. He didn't get adopted until he was 7. He had very few parental figures in his life. And some of these people had a monetary incentive and would take the kid for the weekend for $100. So he would just try to stay in a corner, and as a result, he had very poor communication skills. So he would learn to communicate by drawing on paper. He was self-taught, and he learned the anatomy not from comic books, but he learned to draw from sculpture and from Michelangelo paintings. Or Michelangelo, however you want to say that. He received a failing grade in art class, and yet he was so far ahead of his instructor. He was building big, epic scenarios while the class was still drawing a cone. His adoptive parents were hard-working, but art was not seen as a career. Drawing was the equivalent of playing cards. He was forbidden to draw in the house because it was a waste of time, so he was told to get a real job. You ever heard that before when you're an artist or a musician? Therefore, he would have to draw at school or at the library in secret. You imagine that, just having to like sneak around and draw? It's like, ooh, evil. You're sneaking around and drawing. Bad kid. He felt like God had an elbow in his neck, he said. He said he just had to get to the end of the race and then good things would happen. He met a girl who he thought was an angel. He felt like his fighting was all worthwhile. She was the opposite of him. She influenced him very positively, and he couldn't find any fault with her. They were together for 3 years, then engaged, and then she was killed by a drunk driver, and he was destroyed by it. There's a quote here where he says, "I don't know if I ever believed in a God, but I felt betrayed by him. He felt like he was being punished, like it was some kind of joke. He spent 3 years after that in a very self-destructive mode. When he was a kid, he played a game in the bathtub where he tried to keep all the water on one side of the bathtub. He kind of equated it to that, where he felt like everything in his life was destroying him, and all of it was the same. All those things that were destroying him was the same, and he was just trying to keep it all on one side. He felt like he had to channel this or he was going to self-destruct. So he found a vehicle to vent all the anger, frustration, and rage, which was the crow. And that became his therapy. If you've ever read the books, seen the movie. Pretty awesome. He worked 8 to 10 hour days at a dealership or on cars, and then he would come home and draw until 2 or 3 in the morning. Then he'd get up and do it again. He said that he had no life other than that. He said he was just putting in time. Music became really important for him. He found some music that spoke to him, like Joy Division, which was a main influence, and I think he mentioned Iggy Pop as well. And they were really prevalent throughout the whole Crow book. Eric Draven, the main character we know from The Crow, was the vehicle for his emotions and the character he came up with because he wasn't comfortable drawing himself. Shelley, the girl that we know from The Crow, was a literal translation of Beverly, the girl who had died. And he said it was a very difficult thing to do because it was like picking at scars, and as a result, he had to do it in increments, and it took him 9 years to finish because of it. He said, "I don't allow myself to stop and critique, or I would find fault with everything and never finish anything." He could get about 60% of what was in his head down on paper, and then he was happy. He felt like if he ever got to 100%, it would be time to quit. He finally finished in the 80s. It was something he just did for himself. He had no plans of publishing it. The people who were in it were based on actual people he knew. All of the names were from the graffiti he took from Detroit, and they were all places from those times. He was asked why he still lives in Detroit, and he said it's where his friends are. He went on talking about his techniques, and I love that he always used the same Kmart colors, those watercolors from Kmart, which if you don't know what Kmart is, it's like kind of like a Walmart. He learned how to make the cheap stuff work for him, and he had the same drawing board since he was a teenager. He talked about his work at a nursing home. He talked about continuing to learn bodywork and framework on cars. He wanted to continue challenging himself. And then on a whim one time, he tested for medical school and he placed really high and went to school. But it was too expensive, so he ended up going back to work. But in the meanwhile, the comic books started to take off. And he was doing some t-shirts for some extra money, and the owner of the store asked him if he had some comic strips. And so The Crow was one of their first books, and it sold really well. So then he looked at the paycheck from his auto body work, and he looked at the paycheck from the Crow artwork books coming in, and he said they ran about neck and neck. And then studios started approaching him, and he talked a lot about this, where he talked to different studio executives about all their ideas for The Crow and stuff, and one guy said that he wanted to have Michael Jackson star in it and make it as a musical, which he was not really thrilled about. But then Alex and Brandon insisted that this story be taken back to its original. Brandon was especially enamored with those books. And he had a quote here that says, "Unfortunately, the world is full of those people who are in the same position I was, where they don't feel like they have a whole lot of hope, or that things are never going to change. And I'm glad that they can get out of my work that there is some light at the end of the tunnel, and that there is some hope." Such an amazing interview. That's the condensed version of it in about 33 minutes. He did talk about some of his techniques and went into some further detail about that as well. The thing about James, it's disturbing to watch, was for me anyway, because he is a black sheep. He looks like he had some communications problems growing up. He looks like he really didn't hang around a lot of people. And yet somehow he managed to channel this whole story of losing the love of his life to a drunk driver, which is ridiculous. While I'm on that topic, Los Angeles, your drunk driving record's way too high. Just ridiculous. And it's because people end up having to drive everywhere. And I know people who are affected by drunk drivers as well. And you can really carry that anger, but for James, he channeled it into what we know as The Crow, which is a timeless, classic piece of art. And the movie is also timeless and classic. And everything that happened to James ended up being in that movie, The Crow. And we even got to know Brandon Lee. And then we got to know the story of Brandon Lee. And now Brandon Lee, that being one of his most recognized pieces, that lives on forever. So I think for any of us who feel like the black sheep, it is possible to take your story and turn it into something like this that can live on forever. And it's amazing, and you don't realize how many millions of people have been touched by James's story. So I think many of us feel like we have to work at something we hate until retirement, but I believe we are living life in real time. If you have something you love to do, you should just do it, because life is meant to be lived. But all the seemingly bad parts can contribute to something bigger like The Crow, which has touched all these people. We don't have to think too much about it. We just have to live it. I really connected with James because my passions have been living in real time based on real life. And something that always sticks out with me after seeing this interview, and I've watched it so many times and just, revisited it, but 9 years. This is 9 years he took to write The Crow. And it was because it was so hard on him. But at the same time, he was injecting real life stuff into this. And that's really cool that he was able to do that. I think we feel like if we have to get something done in our life, it has to be done today, this month, or this year, or we cannot live. We cannot move on and have a life. But as it turns out, James was working at all these crazy jobs, going through all these emotions he was going through with losing the love of his life. And yet here he pecked away at it just a little over 9 years and came up with something that will last forever. Like, how cool is that? So I think for me, since reading the whole 9 years, and I think about that 9 years thing all the time, I can peck away at something that's bugging me in my life a little bit at a time until I have something. And I'm doing this with, other writing that I'm doing and other music I'm working on. And if it takes 9 years, so be it. I hope it won't take 9 years. But it doesn't seem as overwhelming. If you have something you want to work on, it doesn't have to be done today. And if it's too emotionally draining for you, better to work on something that comes from a real place and take longer to do it than to do something superficial or artificial and have it done really quickly. And then it just dies. And then you just made something that just died. So I signed off my blog today, chopping off the hair from the Bratz dolls. And I wrote that because him talking about getting his paints from Kmart, these cheap paints, The art community and the music community that I've been involved with for pretty much my whole life has a tendency to be really stuck up about the things they use, the products they use, the gear they use in the studios. You don't need all that stuff. You need that raw emotion, that ingenuity, your imagination, and yeah, continue to learn. I mean, James did. He learned from sketches and continued to hone his art, but he didn't feel like he had to go spend, thousands of dollars on a new drawing board and really fancy paints to get what he wanted. So I didn't add a quote onto the end of it because I probably have enough quotes in the body today. But I wanted to share that with you. Like I said, if you get a chance, there's a 4-part series on YouTube with that James O'Barr interview, which watching it perhaps could have a bigger impact than me just talking about it, because James, his personality is very different from most people you might run into. But for some reason, as disturbing as it was to watch, because things are so upsetting to him, I felt connected still. So these black sheep in the world are the people who are making a difference. So if you really feel like you're one of those, you too can make a difference. Anyway, I will sign off today. It's always good talking to you guys, and I look forward to talking to you tomorrow. All right? Till next time. Rock on.